How do your finances shape your politics? Author Avi Tuschman worked closely with 18 heads of state and government, breaking down political orientations all around the world. From China to the United States, the author explains how the changing economic status shapes who we are. To our Phillip Yin.
When people are under a lot of economic pressure and they haven't yet made that transition to the middle class, they're more willing to look beyond themselves and to be accepting of very strong political authority. However, we can't know if they'll vote for one on the left or the right. This is more of an issue of personality that the book looks into. But when they do go into the middle class, they become more likely to question whether government officials will do what is in their best interest. And they become more politically moderate at the same time. But you do see these growing pains protests in countries like Brazil, where a sixth of the population was lifted out of poverty in the last decade. And also in countries like Chile and Colombia, and somewhat in China as well. So that's why people are expecting more for their governments.
When you say they expect more, now when you're in the working class or even prior to the working class, you're struggling to put food on the table, you're just trying to hold a job, you're trying to provide for your family. As you get into the middle class, you have all of that, or most of it, and you're trying to get more. You want perhaps a nicer house, you want a nicer education for your child. There are all these things that once you get into the middle class, I don't want to say you get greedy, but your expectations also rise for the next generation as well.
This is something that happens with the transition to the middle class, but it's also something we see with globalization. For example, if you take the Middle East and you look at the year 2002, in that year the same amount of books were translated into Spanish in Spain as books were translated into Arabic in the past 1,000 years. And then by the end of the decade, of course, you had this onslaught of new information into internet-equipped smartphones and satellite cable television stations. And people could see not only what's happening across the train tracks or the river, but what's happening across the border and even around the world.
Is the middle class expecting too much of the government?
Sometimes these expectations can be problematic, especially for governments. We just saw some of the new reforms in China that there's going to be a committee to oversee this type of social unrest. So it's something that is important from a leadership point of view. And conversely, when you have a declining middle class in more developed countries, or people who expect that they may be going into losing their middle class status, you see an expansion of the political spectrum and different kinds of protests. Like in America after the 2008 financial crisis, we saw an expansion in both directions. We saw the Occupy Wall Street movement on the far left, as well as a Tea Party emerge further to the right of the conventional Republican Party.
As you get older and become more successful, you do change on how you view taxes, how you view what government should or shouldn't do. What was your research telling you?
So there are two chapters in Our Political Nature that do show how as we go through the life cycle and get older, there is a shift in our political personalities. And we find this all around the world. So for example, people become, in their teenage years, there are parts of the brain that, like the limbic system, flare up and make people a little bit more rebellious. And then around the mid-20s, you have a part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is finishing developing, which we didn't used to know that it develops so late. And this is the reason, of course, why actuarial statisticians and car insurance companies are wary of renting a car to someone younger than 25. And this is also related to the age structure.
Well, it's about responsibility.
Exactly. So this part of your brain is able to make complex risk decisions, measuring immediate incentives against long-term consequences. So if you look at some of the countries in the Middle East where the Arab Spring emerged, like particularly Egypt, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, in all of those countries in 2011, the median age was below 25. And in fact, in Yemen, it was even lower than 18.
But the younger folks want change because their future is very much at stake.
Yes, and they're also willing to go out into the streets and take some important risks.